Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin.
I couldn't tell you what bothered me more. The way my grandfather looked at me, like I was a misbehaving dog, or the silence that followed. It was at that banquet, the one where my family always acted like the world's most perfect portrait of wealth and power, sitting in our gilded chairs, pretending everything was just fine. My mother sat beside me, stiff as ever, her smile fixed in place but her eyes somewhere far off. On my other side, Eric was trying to act like a grown-up. No more jokes, no more easy camaraderie from our childhood. He was just a cold, corporate version of the kid who used to play with me by the garden. The food came and went in front of us, unnoticed, while the conversation spiraled, like it always did. My grandfather, the chairman, spoke in his usual cold, clipped tone. The family enterprise was mentioned, as it always was, like some sacred mantra. "Helena," he said, glancing at me over his glass of wine, "do you believe in the family enterprise?" I looked at him, then at the rest of them, all waiting for me to say what they wanted. "Yes, Chairman." That's the correct answer. The only answer. I didn't say it. A tight, cold silence settled, a pressure against my chest. I didn't even notice my father's hand slip under the table, the sharp kick that connected with my cheek. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. His eyes locked with mine for just a second, cold and calculating. No one noticed. No one reacted. The clinking of cutlery filled the silence, and conversation continued like it was any other evening. Eric, who'd once been my closest confidant, leaned in close, his voice low but firm. "Show respect to the chairman." That was the moment I knew. That was the moment I understood. The family's power didn't come from strength alone. It came from the complicity of everyone sitting around that table. Eric included. He had sold me out. Later that night, in the quiet of my childhood bedroom, I thought about Eric and the games we used to play when we were kids. I thought about the secrets he once whispered to me, like the time he told me about Unit 7, Locker 14. I'd buried that memory deep. But now I wondered if it was time to dig it up. I couldn't stop thinking about the kick. I knew deep down, it wasn't about me refusing to say yes, Chairman. It was about what happens when you don't toe the line. When you step out of their perfect little box, you break the illusion, and that's when the real punishment comes. It's not just about the physical blow. It's the threat behind it. The understanding that you can't escape. Not really. Not unless you're ready to burn everything down. Control was embedded in me before I even knew how to spell my name. Before I could ride a bike, I had to recite mission statements, the mission statement in front of anyone who would listen. If I didn't get it right, well, it was another round of drills until I could say it in my sleep. I don't know how many times I've said the words, "The Montgomery family is committed to building a legacy of integrity and excellence." They weren't just words. They were a contract. You lived them, or you disappeared. My grandfather, the chairman, was the heart of it all. He wasn't just cold, he was an ice storm. A retired CEO who had managed to crawl into the pockets of the most powerful politicians and now sat at the top of a much darker food chain. He was more than just feared. He was a symbol. He didn't speak much at dinners, but when he did, every single person in that room hung on his every word. You didn't argue with him. You didn't question him. You didn't even look at him sideways. He was the law, the face of power. The rules were simple: obey or be erased. And then there was my father, the enforcer, corporate fixer. He was the one who made sure the cracks didn't show. He kept the messes hidden, scrubbed the stains out of everything the public might see. He dealt with the problems that came up. Problems like missing employees, tax audits, internal leaks. I learned young that you don't talk about things that don't fit the family's narrative. You cover them up. The way he'd wipe his mouth with a napkin after a meal, calm, controlled, like he hadn't just buried someone's career, was the real tell. My dad didn't raise his voice much. He didn't need to. His silence was a warning all on its own. His anger was quiet, cold, but it was there. Then there was my mother. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way, she stopped being a person and became a figurehead. She'd been a marketing executive once, back when she had ideas, when she smiled without it looking like she was hiding a secret. But now she lived in her own version of retreat, eyes dull, speaking only when spoken to. Her skin had that same hollow, fragile sheen that came with too many nights alone with her thoughts, over too many glasses of wine. I remember the nights I'd see the marks on her neck, her wrists, bruises barely covered by makeup. She didn't speak of them. She never did. She just put on another layer of foundation and kept going. And then there was Eric, my cousin. I don't know where he started to change. He wasn't always like this. He used to be the one who'd sneak me out of family parties just to sit and talk in the garden, where we could be real for a second. He'd ask about what was happening at school, what I was reading, what I wanted to be when I grew up. But somewhere along the way, he fell in line. He became just like the rest of them. I remember a conversation we had when we were kids. I was 10 or 11, and we were playing catch by the old estate fountain when Eric said something strange. He'd overheard a meeting between my father and some business associates, he told me, and they were talking about bad deals, missing employees, accounts with falsified numbers, entire teams of people left to dry out because of something they'd done, or something they hadn't. His face had been pale when he told me, and I could see the weight of it in his eyes. He whispered to me then, "We need to be careful. This isn't what it seems." It was the kind of thing that should have been a red flag for both of us, a turning point. But now, when I looked at him, I realized what had happened. He wasn't the same person anymore. He didn't see me as his ally, his equal. He saw me as someone who was dangerous. Dangerous for asking questions. Dangerous for remembering things they'd rather forget. Defiance wasn't just rebellion in our world, it was sabotage. When you didn't play the game by their rules, you broke everything. The kick under the table. That wasn't some outburst of anger, that was protocol. And in that moment, I finally understood. I wasn't just an outsider in this family anymore. I was a threat. The morning after the banquet, the air felt thick with something unspoken. It hung around me like a cloud, heavier than it had the night before, when the last thing I wanted was another family strategy brunch. But there I was, walking through the same familiar hallways of the estate, the ones that always seemed so grand when I was a kid but now felt suffocating. I sat down at the same long, polished table. The coffee was already poured, steaming in front of everyone, the cups perfectly aligned, like some silent command was being followed. The same ritual, the same empty pleasantries. The chairman sat at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the room, sizing everyone up before speaking. My mother, as always, was seated beside him, too quiet, too small. She picked at her food, her hand trembling ever so slightly as she adjusted her napkin, but she didn't speak unless she was spoken to. My father was across from me, his face unreadable, his movements deliberate but detached. He sliced his eggs with a precision that bordered on obsessive, the fork scraping softly against the plate, a sound that seemed louder than anything else in the room. He didn't eat, just cut. Eric sat next to him, rigid, a stack of papers neatly arranged in front of him. He hadn't looked at me all morning. The conversation floated around us like a script, a delicate dance of words no one ever questioned. The chairman asked my father about the firm's quarterly numbers, his voice sharp but calculated, like every word was a calculated move on a chessboard. Then the chairman turned his gaze on me, his voice cut through the quiet. "Helena, how's the writing coming along? Still dabbling in your emotional indulgences?" He said it like it was some kind of joke, but his eyes didn't laugh. I shrugged, my fingers tracing the rim of my coffee cup. "It's coming along fine, Grandpa." He snorted, a dry, humorless sound. Fluff. That's what it is. Emotionally indulgent fluff, written by the sentimental children of privileged families. His eyes lingered for a second longer than necessary, and for a moment I felt like I was some kind of exhibit in a zoo, there to be observed, judged, and discarded. Eric cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably beside my father. Then he began his report on some foreign corporate acquisition project, the kind of thing that always sounded more like an excuse for laundering money than an actual business deal. His words were rehearsed, measured, but his hands, they betrayed him. His fingers twitched slightly as he passed a document over to the chairman, and I saw it, a tremor, a small one, barely noticeable to anyone else. But I saw it. The chairman didn't seem to notice, though. He nodded, approving, before turning his attention to the next thing, his mind already moving on to whatever came next. The moment passed. I watched them all. My father still slicing his food with that clinical precision, never actually eating a bite. My mother shrinking more into her seat, her eyes darting around the room like she was invisible. The chairman scanning the table like a general checking troop discipline, his face impassive, calculating. I had spent my whole life trying to ignore the feeling that something was off in this family, trying to see them as normal, trying to find a way to fit. But now it was impossible to ignore. They weren't just cold, They were hiding something. I couldn't shake the thought of Unit 7, Locker 14. That phrase kept echoing in my head, louder now, like a door I'd never bothered to open. What did it mean? I'd never asked Eric what he'd meant back then, never asked for more than that cryptic, whispered warning. It was just a game we played, a secret shared between us, a part of a world I hadn't wanted to see. But maybe I should have asked. Maybe it was time to find out what it was really about. Because something was buried in that family, in the business. Something darker than just cold, calculated power. Something I wasn't meant to understand. Something that had been covered up for years. I finished my coffee, barely tasting it. The whole brunch felt like a performance now, each gesture and word meticulously crafted, each movement calculated to remind me of my place. And my place wasn't to ask questions. It wasn't to think, it was to play the part, say the right things, smile when I needed to. I didn't fit here anymore. But I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Something told me I needed to dig deeper, find out what was hidden beneath the surface, find out what had been tucked away in that old dark corner of the estate. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I slipped out of my room. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, each step making the air heavier, more suffocating. The hallways were quiet, like the house was holding its breath. The private business archive was just beyond the library, tucked away in a glass-walled room no one was supposed to enter unless you had the right clearance. But I had a plan. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I knew I had to start somewhere. The files were there, hidden in plain sight, each one labeled with numbers and names that felt too official, too detached. The room smelled like old paper and expensive wood polish. There were rows of shelves neatly stacked with ledgers and contracts, things that looked too important to touch. But I wasn't supposed to ask questions. That was the rule. And I had spent my whole life following it, until now. I moved quickly, quietly, skimming through the first few files. They were all what I expected. Bland business contracts, acquisitions, mergers, things that meant nothing to anyone but the people who ran this family's empire. Then, tucked behind a binder, I found something different, a keycard. The label on it read, Unit 7. My breath caught in my throat. It was a strange, simple thing, a small plastic card, but it was heavy with significance. I slid it into the pocket of my jacket, ignoring the way my hands trembled as I looked around. No one was supposed to know I had this. No one was supposed to know I was poking around in things they'd buried for years. But I was beyond caring. I didn't waste any time. I made my way to the service wing, the part of the estate I hadn't seen since I was a kid. It was old, abandoned, and practically off-limits now. A relic of the past that no one cared to preserve. The doors were locked, of course, but not anymore. I swiped the keycard, and the door clicked open, the sound echoing too loudly in the silence. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the dim light barely cut through the gloom. The hall was narrow, lined with old wooden doors. The locker I was looking for was at the far end. Locker 14. My chest tightened as I approached it, fingers grazing the cold metal. The keycard worked again, and the lock clicked open with a soft snick. I pulled the door open and froze. It wasn't what I expected. I thought there would be more corporate files, more paperwork. But instead, inside was a dusty old strongbox. I hadn't expected that. I hadn't expected to find something so personal. I lifted the heavy lid, my fingers shaking, and inside were things I didn't understand at first. Childhood drawings, Eric's scribbled notes, scraps of paper with half-finished thoughts and ideas, things I'd never seen before. It felt wrong to touch them, like I was intruding on something sacred, something private. But there was more. A sealed envelope. The kind of envelope you don't open unless you have to. I ripped it open, hands numb, and pulled out the pages inside. The words were shaky but unmistakable. The handwriting was Eric's, no doubt. It was a testimony, of sorts. It detailed an offshore operation, one I didn't recognize at first. Forced labor, shell companies, dirty money funneled through accounts I couldn't even begin to trace. It described employees treated like property, underpaid, overworked, and forgotten. There were names, dates, amounts. And then, in the margins, were initials. My father's, my grandfather's. I let the paper fall from my hands, the weight of it sinking in. I didn't know if I was angry or just broken. My mind was racing, but all I could think of was Eric's words, written years ago, buried in this box. If I ever turn into them, don't let me stay that way. I slammed the box shut, my heart hammering in my chest. This was it. This was the truth I'd been looking for. I didn't know if Eric had meant for me to find it, but I knew now what I had to do. I had to take it. I grabbed the envelope and tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket, leaving the rest of the box undisturbed. My eyes scanned the room one last time, my skin prickling as if I might be caught any second. I couldn't afford to get caught now, not when I was this close. Quietly, I left the service wing and retraced my steps back to the library. My legs felt like lead, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I had the truth now. It was mine. The house was still, but it felt different now. Something had shifted, something I couldn't undo. And for the first time, I felt like I had a choice in this world, even if it meant tearing down everything that had kept me locked inside it for so long. I walked back to my room and locked the door behind me, clutching the envelope like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. The next night, the dinner felt like an ambush I'd been preparing for my entire life. I sat at the same long table, the same quiet ritual of the family's strict formality in place. Everyone was in their assigned seats, my grandfather at the head, my father at his right, my mother in her usual spot near the end, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Eric sat across from me, eyes forward, his face a perfect mask. No one was speaking, just the occasional clink of cutlery against china. The air was thick with the unsaid things that always hovered around these meals. Tonight, though, there was something else beneath it, the weight of everything I knew now. I had my phone in my pocket, hidden, recording. It was the only way to make sure I wouldn't be dismissed, to make sure my family couldn't erase what I was about to say. The tension in my chest was like a vice, but I couldn't back down. Not now. Not after what I'd found. I cleared my throat, feeling the eyes of everyone at the table shift toward me. I've been looking into some of the company's past activities, I said, keeping my voice steady. Specifically, Shell 38. My words hit the table like stones. Eric's fork paused midair. He flinched just a small movement, but it was enough. It was enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My grandfather's eyes narrowed, and he kept chewing, slow and deliberate, like he was trying to decide whether or not he should stop. My father didn't look at me. He just stared at his plate, cutting the food with that same mechanical precision, like he was pretending none of this was happening. You've been looking into the company. My grandfather's voice was low, cold. He wasn't asking a question. It was more like a command. I kept my gaze steady. I think it's important we address it. A lot of discrepancies, names erased, numbers that don't match up. Eric's jaw tightened. His hands, which had been steady just a moment before, started to twitch slightly. It was barely noticeable, but I saw it. I didn't back down. I leaned forward, letting the silence sit in the air for a beat too long. Eric, I said, my voice just above a whisper, do you remember that secret meeting we had in the garden when we were kids? For a moment, his face went blank. His eyes darted just a fraction of an inch, but I saw it. I saw the fear. What are you talking about? He replied, his voice too calm, too practiced. I don't know what you mean, but I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. I let the silence drag on just a bit longer, then dropped the code. Unit 7, Locker 14. I could feel the room freeze. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall seemed to grow louder, each second stretching out longer than it should. Eric went pale, his face drained of all color, the mask cracking just for a moment. His hand shook as he placed his fork down slowly, too slowly. My grandfather's eyes locked onto mine, piercing and unblinking. My father's gaze finally lifted from his plate, but he didn't look at me. He looked at Eric like a silent question passed between them. And then, slowly, Eric began to speak. It wasn't much at first, just a few vague words, like he was trying to figure out how much of the truth he could let slip. There were mistakes, he started, his voice tight. Things we didn't foresee. Bad deals, bad people. I didn't move, didn't say a word. I just waited. Let the silence draw it out. Eric's shoulders slumped, and then he let out a breath, his voice cracking just a little. There were abuses, he said. His eyes were focused on the table now, like he couldn't look at any of us. Laborers, unpaid, the company, the whole damn thing. It was built on lying. People's lives ruined. He paused, swallowing hard. Names erased, like they never existed. The words hung in the air, raw and ugly. The reality of it settled in, heavy and suffocating. I could feel my pulse pounding in my throat. My father didn't say anything, didn't make a sound. He didn't have to. His silence said everything. My grandfather, though, didn't blink. He didn't even seem to flinch at what Eric had just confessed. I watched them all. My family, the ones who had always been untouchable, powerful, unchallenged. And now, they were cracked. I could see the fissures, the lies barely holding together under the weight of the truth. The phone in my pocket buzzed once, just a light vibration, but it was enough. I knew it was recording everything. I had everything I needed. I wasn't afraid of them anymore, not of their silence, not of their threats, because now the truth was out there, and no matter how hard they tried to bury it, it wouldn't go away. Do you still think this family is worth protecting? I asked Eric, my voice low, barely a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked up at me, his face a mess of guilt and shame. But there was something else in his eyes, something I hadn't expected. Regret. He didn't want this anymore. He didn't want any of it. Slowly, he nodded, a barely perceptible movement. No, he said, voice hoarse. I don't. And in that moment, I knew. The war had already begun. The night after dinner, I sat alone in my room, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I pulled my phone from my pocket and stared at it for a long moment, the screen flickering in the dim light. It was time. There was no turning back now. I hit play. Eric's voice filled the room. The words came out slow and hesitant at first, but they kept coming. His confession, raw and unfiltered. The things he said about the company, about the people they'd used, the lives they'd ruined, it was all there, every word, every breath. It was all on tape now, and there was no denying it. I listened to it all twice. The first time, I was in shock. The second time, I was just angry at the family who had built their empire on lies, angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. I made a call right after the second listen. My hands were shaking when I dialed. Hey, it's Helena, I said into the phone, my voice tight. I need you to help me with something. It's big. I was talking to Jason, a lawyer I'd met through some old contacts. He worked for a corporate watchdog group, the kind of people who dig through the dirt when no one else will. I wasn't sure if it was because he was a friend or because he was just used to dealing with dirt, but I trusted him. I've got the evidence. Everything. I need help anonymizing it, at least for the initial leak, I told him. This is bigger than I thought. It's not just bad business. It's criminal. Jason was quiet for a long time, and I could hear the wheels turning in his head. All right, he said finally. I'll take care of it. But you're ready for the fallout, right? This is gonna blow up. I'm ready. We hung up, but I didn't feel ready. I felt like I'd just lit a match and thrown it into a dry forest. The next day, it happened. The story broke. It didn't take long. News outlets jumped on it as soon as the story was out. A corporate giant, a well-respected family name, tied to a network of offshore accounts, forced labor, falsified financials. The investigation was already in full swing by the time I saw the first headline flash across my phone. Montgomery Enterprises under investigation for illegal labor practices. I wasn't sure if I should feel relief or fear. I didn't have long to think about it. That night, my father stormed through the house like a storm cloud, his face red with rage. The sounds of his footsteps echoed down the hall, too loud, too fast. Who did this? He yelled, his voice like ice and fire at the same time. Who the hell is leaking our business? His words made me freeze. I stood at the top of the stairs, watching as he barked orders at the security team, his eyes darting to the cameras like he was hunting for ghosts. He ordered another sweep for bugs, paranoia dripping from his every word. I didn't move, didn't say a thing. I knew better than to engage with that kind of fury. Not now, not yet. And then there was my mother. She was quieter than usual, even more withdrawn, like she'd become a shadow of herself again. I saw her later that night, when everyone else was gone, her face pale and worn. She didn't speak as she handed me a flash drive, cold and small in my hand. You're not the first, she said softly, her voice so faint it almost didn't reach me. But you might be the last. I just nodded, not knowing what to say. My mother had been silent for so long. I couldn't remember the last time she'd opened up, really spoken about anything. But I could see it in her eyes. Her resignation, her defeat. I didn't look at the flash drive until I was alone in my room again. When I finally plugged it into my laptop, a sinking feeling filled my chest. It wasn't just files, it was a collection of stories. Messages from former employees, distant cousins who had seen things but were too scared to speak. And there were women. Women who had been silenced, who had been pushed out of the family business, who had been hurt. Their stories spilled out onto the screen, each one more harrowing than the last. They thanked me for speaking up, for breaking the silence. They told me their truths too. It hit me, in that moment, that this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of them. All the voices that had been smothered by the Montgomery name. All the lives destroyed because no one had ever dared to stand up to it. The messages kept coming, more than I could keep up with. I read them one after the other, my heart heavy, and then, there it was. One message, buried at the bottom of the list, from someone I didn't recognize. You're not alone. It started with you, but it doesn't end with you. Keep going. I sat back, my hands trembling as I stared at the words on the screen. I wasn't just exposing my family, I was starting something much bigger than myself. And there was no turning back now. The days that followed felt like a slow burn, each moment heavier than the last. It was like the world was shifting under my feet, and I wasn't sure which way was up anymore. I stayed in my room a lot, reading through the messages, the stories that people sent me, trying to make sense of it all. But what struck me the most was the silence in the house. It was a silence that felt different, darker. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the absence of pretense. Then, one morning, as I was staring blankly at my phone, an email popped up. It was from my aunt. I hadn't heard from her in years. She had left the family long before I ever could, cutting ties when things started falling apart. I never understood why, until now. Her message was simple, direct. Helena, I need to speak with you. I've seen the files. I know what you found. I felt my stomach tighten as I read the words again, unsure what to expect. It had been years since I'd spoken to her, but now she was reaching out. I didn't hesitate. I dialed her number, and when she answered, her voice sounded tired, worn thin by years of silence. I knew it was only a matter of time before someone else woke up, she said, the bitterness in her tone cutting through the line. You're right about everything, Helena. Everything you found is true. I tried to report it once. I tried to go to the authorities. But your father, he made sure I stayed quiet. They knew I was dangerous, so they made sure I couldn't speak. Blackmailed me into silence. I couldn't fight it. The words stung, the regret in her voice raw. I couldn't even find anything to say, not at first. She had tried. She had seen it. And they had crushed her. They've been doing this for years, using people, ruining lives, she continued. I don't know how much longer they'll hold on, but you. You've made sure someone else knows. You finally said it out loud. That's a start. I stayed quiet, digesting her words. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. I wasn't the only one who'd seen the truth. It had been hidden for so long, buried under layers of power and fear, but now it was coming to light. Just after that conversation, I got another message. This one was from Jenna, Eric's younger sister, the one who had left the family years ago. I hadn't expected to hear from her, not after all this time. We all saw it, Helena, all of us, but you finally said it out loud. You're the one who did it. Don't stop now. I stared at her message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the screen. There was something about hearing it from her, knowing she was out there, that we weren't the only ones who knew the truth, that made everything feel a little more real, a little more solid. Eric had avoided me ever since the dinner, avoiding my eyes whenever we crossed paths. The tension was unbearable, like there was a weight between us that neither of us could move. But that afternoon, after I came back from my phone call with my aunt, I saw him standing in the garden, just staring at the trees like he was waiting for something. I didn't hesitate. I walked straight toward him. He didn't look at me as I approached. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders tense. It was clear that the anger was building inside him, but there was something else too, something heavier, something I couldn't name. I'm not going to pretend you didn't destroy everything, he said, his voice sharp, but there was a tremor in it that I hadn't expected. Do you think you're bringing this whole family down? Is that the point? You think you're just going to expose us all and make it go away? I stood there, feeling a lump rise in my throat, but I pushed it down. I didn't need to feel sorry for him anymore, not after everything I'd learned. No, Eric, I said quietly. I don't need to bring the family down. They're doing it to themselves. For a moment, we stood in silence. The wind rustled the leaves above us, and the weight of everything that had been said hung in the air between us. Eric's eyes flickered to mine, and for a second, I thought he might say something else. But instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. It was thick, sealed shut with a rubber band. "Take it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's evidence. Everything I kept. Things I never showed anyone. You don't have to trust me, but maybe you can use this. Maybe it'll help." I took the folder from him, feeling the weight of it, the same weight that had crushed all of us for so long. "Do what you need to," he said, his voice flat, empty. "Just make it end." He turned and walked away without another word, leaving me standing there in the garden, holding the folder in my hands. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew this. I wasn't alone anymore. There were others, and the truth would come out, no matter how hard they tried to bury it. It didn't take long for everything to unravel. A formal inquiry was launched. The chairman was subpoenaed, his name plastered across every headline, every news outlet. For the first time, people outside the family were talking about what had been hidden for so long. Financial oversight boards got their hands on the documents I'd helped leak. The stock in our private firm plummeted. Shares dropped so fast it was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. The power that had seemed so unshakable was suddenly a house of cards, teetering on the edge of a fall. My father, the enforcer, was the first to lose control. I saw it in the way he moved, like someone whose entire foundation was crumbling beneath him. At first, he tried to keep it together. He made calls, gave speeches to the few remaining loyalists in the company. But those walls began to crack. His temper, usually so controlled, flared at the slightest provocation. I watched him one night, furious, as he hurled a framed photo of the family into the fireplace, the glass shattering on impact. He didn't even flinch, just stared at the flames, as if watching something burn that had been alive for too long. The alcohol came next. The brandy bottle, once a symbol of careful indulgence, became his crutch. I saw him late at night, stumbling through the house, the smell of it on his breath, slurring his words as he ranted about betrayal, about the family name being dragged through the mud. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. His rage felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. I watched it all with a strange calm, an emptiness in my chest. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? The truth to come to light, for the world to see what had been hidden in the shadows for so long. And yet, as the pieces of our empire fell apart, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt nothing. A kind of weight pressing down, but not the weight of victory. The weight of knowing things could never go back to the way they were. Eric testified. The day he stood before the court, I watched the news, numb. He described the pressure, the manipulation, the cover-ups. His voice was steady, but his words felt like daggers. The truth had finally been spoken, but there was no joy in it. There was no satisfaction. Only the slow realization that the legacy we had all been so desperate to protect had already rotted from the inside out. It hit the front page, of course. The whole world knew now. And somewhere in that testimony, it was clear. Eric was no longer protecting the family. He wasn't holding up the facade anymore. The moment his words hit the airwaves, the family's reputation was forever shattered. And then one morning, the phone rang. It was a call I'd been waiting for, but I didn't expect the news to hit like it did. My grandfather was dead. He had fallen down the estate's main staircase. They found him at the bottom, glass shattered in his hand. No note, no camera footage to explain what had happened. Just silence. The whole house went still. No one spoke for a long time after that. The staff, the security, even my father, who had always held this unspoken reverence for the man, stood frozen in place. I don't know why it didn't hit me like I thought it would. I should have felt something. Relief, maybe satisfaction, but I didn't. I felt gravity. The kind that sinks deep into your bones, pulling everything down with it. It wasn't that I wanted him dead. It wasn't that I even felt angry. It was just over. My father didn't say anything for hours. When he did speak, it was to order everyone around, like it was just another business problem to solve. Like the world hadn't just shifted beneath our feet. His voice was cold, distant, the way it always had been when he was trying to reassert control. But no one in the house seemed to buy it anymore. The power was gone. The chair at the head of the table had been knocked over, and no one was reaching for it. I stood by the window, staring out at the sprawling grounds, watching as the staff scrambled to handle the aftermath. My fingers tightened around the edge of the glass, my reflection staring back at me. But it wasn't me I saw. It was something else, something that had been buried under years of fear and loyalty. I had done what I set out to do, but the cost. The cost was more than I'd ever realized. And now with the chairman gone, with everything falling apart around us, I had to wonder, what now? What was left when everything that defined us, everything that held us up, was gone? The silence in the house was deafening, but it wasn't my grandfather's death that shook me. It was the understanding that no matter what came next, the end had already begun. After my grandfather's death, the house felt different. It wasn't just the absence of his presence at the head of the table or the silent whispers that seemed to float through the rooms. It was something deeper. The power my father once held, the fear that had surrounded him for so long, was suddenly gone. People stopped looking to him for guidance. The family, the employees, even the board members. They stopped bowing to him in the way they had before. There was no more authority in his voice, no more respect in the way people turned when he walked into a room. It wasn't that they didn't fear him anymore, they simply didn't believe in him. Investigators showed up one morning with warrants, flooding the estate like a storm. The house that had once felt like a fortress, impenetrable and secure, now felt like a house of cards, teetering on the edge. It was a weird kind of justice, watching them walk through the doors that had always been reserved for the family. Now they were just another part of the scene, moving through the halls that had been the backdrop for our lies. My mother, who had always been a shadow, started to change too. At first, it was subtle. She'd never been the one to speak out, never the one to challenge anything. But after everything had exploded, after the truth came out, she began speaking more. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was clear. When she spoke, I heard her voice for the first time in years. One night, she sat beside me on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't look at me when she spoke, but I could hear the quiet urgency in her words. "I thought silence was safety," she said, her voice low, as if testing the words on herself. "I thought if I didn't make waves, if I stayed quiet, I could keep us all safe." "Keep you safe?" She paused, her hands trembling as she fidgeted with her necklace. I was wrong. It wasn't like I hadn't heard her thoughts on this before. I had. But hearing it in her voice, hearing the rawness of it, hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't just talking about her own regrets. She was talking about all of us. The lies we'd told ourselves. The things we'd allowed to happen in the name of keeping things peaceful. She looked at me then, her eyes full of something I hadn't seen in years. "I don't know what you're going to do with everything, Helena. But I can't stay quiet anymore. I don't want to be a part of this." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, because I didn't have the words. Over the next few days, the media storm grew. Every news outlet, every blog, every social media platform had their eyes on the Montgomery family. They dug through our past with a viciousness that made the whole thing feel surreal. The world wanted blood, wanted answers, and everyone who had ever been hurt by this family was coming forward. I stayed grounded through it all, even when the weight of it felt like it might crush me. I didn't want fame. I didn't want to be a part of the circus. I didn't want any of the attention. What I wanted was accountability. I wanted those who had been silenced to finally have a voice. I started collecting statements from people, women who had been silenced by my family's reach, who had been pushed to the edges of the world because they knew too much or dared to question the way things worked. They sent their stories to me, each one more painful than the last. Some of them had been on the inside. Others had been outsiders, former employees or associates who'd seen things they shouldn't have. They all thanked me, and in return, I gave them a voice. Eric, for his part, had been avoiding me. I knew why. He was torn between the legacy of his name and the truth that had come out. He was caught in a kind of purgatory, unable to step fully into either world. One evening, he came to me, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His face was pale, his eyes red from whatever battles he'd been fighting inside his own head. "I'm thinking about leaving," he said, his voice hoarse. "I can't stay here. Not with everything that's happening. I need to get out. I'm thinking about leaving the country." I looked at him, and for a second, I saw the boy who used to play with me in the garden, the one who had tried to warn me years ago, the one who had shared that secret phrase with me, the one who had once believed in something else. "You should go," I said, and the words felt colder than I meant them to. But not to run. To start over, to find something else. His eyes searched mine. as if looking for an answer I couldn't give him. Finally, he nodded. "I'll go," he said quietly, then handed me a folder. It was thick, sealed with a rubber band. Everything I kept. I never showed anyone. "You can use it if you need to." I took the folder from him, but I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I had everything I needed. The truth was already out there. Later that evening, I walked outside to the cedar tree in the garden, the one that had always been a quiet witness to everything, the one that had stood in silence while we pretended to be something we weren't. I dug a small hole beneath its roots and buried the final folder. Not because I was giving up on it, but because I didn't need it anymore. The truth had already been told, and I wasn't going to hold on to it any longer. I stood there for a long time, the earth cool beneath my fingers, and I finally understood. It wasn't about the past anymore, it was about the future. And for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. The estate felt different now. It was quieter, emptier, like a stage that had been dismantled after the final act, with all the lights turned off, the set packed away. Everything I had once seen as part of some grand performance now looked hollow, barren. The walls that had felt so imposing, the rooms so full of history, now seemed small. The marble floors echoed too loudly with every step. It was like the house itself was holding its breath, unsure of what came next. I walked through the halls, my footsteps slow, deliberate. The air felt heavier than it used to, not in a suffocating way, but in a way that reminded me that things could never be the same again. Nothing would ever be as it had been. I made my way to the garden. The trees, once trimmed to perfection, now had a kind of wildness to them. The wind stirred the leaves, and they moved gently in response, like they were listening to something just beyond my reach. It wasn't the same peaceful garden it had once been. But in the wind, in the way the trees bent with the breeze, there was something else. For the first time in years, I felt a breath, real breath. Not just air filling my lungs, but freedom. It was strange, almost like I could feel the weight lifting from my chest. I stood there for a long time, watching the light shift through the branches. This had been the place where everything had started. The secret meetings, the whispers. Now it was where I could finally stand still without looking over my shoulder. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived. It was from a journalist I didn't know, someone who had been covering the fallout. I opened it carefully, already knowing what it would say. "The investigation will continue. More women are speaking up, telling their stories. You're not alone. It started with you." I held the letter in my hands for a long moment, feeling the weight of those words. It wasn't just about my family anymore. It was about everyone who had been silenced for years, everyone who had been pushed down by the same system I had once been a part of. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. I didn't go back to the dinner table that night. I couldn't. The thought of sitting there pretending everything was normal, pretending that family still meant something, after all that had happened, felt impossible. Instead, I went outside again, to the cedar tree where it all began. I sat beneath its branches, the cool earth beneath me grounding me in a way nothing else had. The sky was darkening, but the air still carried a warmth to it, like a promise. I closed my eyes and let the silence settle around me. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't even thinking about the destruction of the family I had once known. What I was thinking about was consequence, what it costs to see the truth, to finally pull back the curtain and understand how deeply the lies had seeped into everything. But there was something else too. What it gave in return? The truth had brought me to this moment. It had set something free in me, something that couldn't be taken back. I opened my eyes, looking at the stars beginning to appear overhead. "My name is Helena Montgomery," I said aloud, my voice steady, the words feeling true in a way I hadn't expected. And they taught me how to follow. I taught them how it ends. It was over, and yet, in some ways, it was just beginning.